Unit 12. Prepare, prepare. Page 107. Listening for main ideas. A. Close your book. Listen to the lecture and take notes.
Good morning. Did any of you hear about the earthquake in California yesterday? You did? Well, fortunately, no one was seriously hurt. Today, I want to talk about what can be done in these types of situations. In the urban planning professions, we need to know the scope of urban problems and make plans in advance for dealing with them. We'll start by talking about the difference between natural hazards and natural disasters. I'm going to give you some ideas about planning, about preparing for a natural hazard. Okay, first some background. Let's look at what I mean by natural hazards. Natural hazards are things that happen in nature that can be dangerous to us, like earthquakes, typhoons, hurricanes, tsunamis, fires, mudslides, volcanic eruptions, avalanches, floods, and tornadoes. Many natural hazards. A hazard, then, is something that can be dangerous. Now, I want to make a distinction between a natural hazard and a natural disaster. As I just said, with a natural hazard, there is the potential for a lot of damage. In contrast, a natural disaster means terrible things do happen and normal life is interrupted. People are killed. There is a lot of destruction. Disasters are what we hear about on the news. You know as well as I do that we can't stop earthquakes or hurricanes. So I want to focus on ways we can limit the impact, how we can prepare to significantly reduce deaths, injuries, and damage when they occur. Preparing is vital. What a country does to prepare is based on the natural hazards that occur in that country. Now, let's consider planning. It's not easy to initiate an emergency response plan. There are many things to consider. At a minimum, it takes scientific information, money, and cooperation between scientists and the government of a country. Scientists and governments need to share information. This isn't always easy to do, for a number of reasons. First, a country may not be able to use scientific information because it doesn't have the money. In a perfect world, governments would have all the money that they need, but in the real world, they don't. So governments have to set priorities for spending. Governments, especially in developing countries, often have to choose between taking care of problems they have now, like needing new roads and schools, and spending money to plan for problems they might have if a natural disaster strikes. A great example is building materials. Scientists know that building materials are very important in minimizing the destruction caused by natural disasters. Some governments are aware that these materials will save lives, but they do not have the money to use them. Second, governments have to decide how and when to use information from scientists. Scientists can't say definitely, 100%, that a storm will happen, or exactly when it will happen. Their information is not precise, so a government has to decide what to do if the scientific data tell them something is likely to happen. It can wait and do nothing, or it can tell people to prepare. Now let's suppose the government tells people to leave their homes. So they do, and it costs a lot of time and money for people to leave. What happens if there is no earthquake, or only a very small earthquake? Will people be willing to leave the next time the government tells them to? Before I talk more about planning, I'm going to tell you about 2 volcanic eruptions. Think about how planning, or lack thereof, was a factor in both. In November 1985, the volcano Nevado del Ruiz erupted in Colombia. For 1 year before this, the volcano had been making noises. Scientists knew that the volcano might erupt, but they could not say when it would happen. The volcano kept making noises, but the people living nearby didn't leave. Scientists had made maps of the most dangerous areas and given these maps to the government. The government, however, wasn't able to use the information before Nevado del Ruiz erupted. When the volcano erupted, it melted snow and ice at the top of the volcano, and suddenly a lot of water rushed down the sides of the volcano, causing huge mud flows. This is when disaster struck. The mud flows moved quickly through several towns. More than 25,000 people were killed in a very short time. They weren't prepared. This was a major disaster. The second example is the volcano that erupted in the late 1990s on the island of Montserrat in the Caribbean. It had been inactive for over 100 years, but in 1995 it started making noises. Scientists watched the volcano very closely and told the government what was going on. The government told the people who lived nearby that they had to move. So the people were evacuated. From 1995 on, the volcano continued to be active. After 5 years, however, only about 19 people had been killed. A major disaster was avoided. Now let's consider these two examples. From the information we have, we know that one country was better prepared than the other. We don't know why. There could be many reasons. It's complicated, and I don't want to sound too critical here, but we can see that Montserrat's plan made a huge difference. Only 19 people died there, while 25,000 people died in Colombia. Okay, let's turn now to initiating an emergency response plan. What basic things do you think any country needs in a plan? What's the first thing? Yes, Alan.
Knowing what's going to happen.
Well, yes. But as we discussed, we can't know with 100% certainty what's going to happen. The first stage is really made up of two parts: gathering information, doing research, and planning how to provide for people's basic needs for food, water, and so on. First, scientists need to gather information from all over the world about the type of hazards that occur in their country. Then they can use the information from their research to try to predict what will happen in the future, and plan accordingly. For example, Japan uses this type of information about earthquakes when it makes new buildings, roads, and so on. This is difficult because the research cannot give them precise information. In the second stage, the government must be prepared to provide for people's basic needs if there is a natural disaster. They need to do a minimum of two things. They need to organize enough emergency supplies, such as food, bottled water, medicine, and so on, and they need to communicate to the people beforehand about where these supplies are located. People need to know where to go. The second stage also covers exactly what everyone needs to do immediately after a natural disaster occurs: police, emergency rescue workers, citizens, etc., and where they should go, how to get there, and so on. This enables people to help themselves. So, the second stage involves providing information and supplies to people. The third stage of an emergency response plan is to recover. This means planning for what to do in the days and weeks following the disaster, and how the government will enable people to return to normal life after the damage is done. It may take years to rebuild after, say, an earthquake. The plan should include who, when, and how. For example, who will rebuild houses and roads, when it will be done, and how it will be paid for. This is only a brief introduction to making a plan. We can't stop natural disasters. They're going to happen. But we can limit the damage they cause. In the next class, we're going to discuss what countries are doing to build safer buildings in earthquake areas. We'll talk about the materials being used. If you have any questions, come see me.
Page 108. Listening for details. A. Close your book. Listen to the lecture again. Add supporting details to your notes, and correct any mistakes.